You know, when you think about structural damage, you usually picture something, well, incredibly tangible.
Right, like a cracked bridge.
Exactly. You might picture a suspension bridge with a fractured support beam or, a house with a cracked foundation. It's physical, it's measurable, and you know that if you ignore it long enough, the whole thing is eventually going to just come crashing down.
Yeah, because those structures are governed by the rigid laws of physics.
Hmm.
We all understand that eventually gravity always wins.
Right, it's intuitive. But what if the structure we are talking about today isn't made of steel or concrete or wood? What if the most critical load-bearing pillar in your entire existence is completely invisible?
And what if the thing that causes it to crack isn't an earthquake or a hurricane, but simply the act of going back on your word?
Welcome to this deep dive. We are bringing you into a fascinating, highly rigid, and honestly quite provocative ethical framework today.
It really is.
Yeah. Our source material is a philosophical and spiritual text written by Shrifang on December 13th, 2025. It's officially titled The Integrity of Life, Preserving the Exquisite Structure, though it's also known by a slightly more ominous title, Beware of Scars Left on the Structure of Life.
Which is quite the title.
It is. And our mission for this deep dive is to unpack a worldview that connects the everyday, totally mundane act of keeping a promise to literal global climate change and, well, spiritual ascension.
Right. But before we really get into the mechanics of how that works, I do want to establish some baseline context for you listening. This text contains very strong spiritual, moral, and metaphysical doctrines.
Very strong.
Yeah. And our goal today is not to endorse or validate these viewpoints as absolute truth. We are not here to take a side or preach a doctrine. Instead, we want to impartially map out this incredibly unique belief system. We want to explore the thought-provoking and, frankly, demanding ideas it contains about human integrity.
Because the way this author frames personal responsibility is something you rarely encounter in modern philosophy.
It is incredibly rare.
So to really grasp the rules of this text, we first have to understand what it claims is the ultimate goal of human existence. The author sets up a very clear destination for you.
Yeah, the text states that, quote, only the most exquisite things are worthy of being enjoyed by the most exquisite lives, unquote.
And it defines an exquisite life with pinpoint precision. It is a life whose non-material structure bears no scars. According to the text, only these completely unblemished lives are permitted to go to something called the Elysium world and its celestial islands continent.
Right, that's the ultimate destination.
And the greatest cause of these disqualifying scars, the act of breaking trust. So, okay, let's unpack this. When I read this description of a non-material structure, my mind immediately went to the concept of a credit score.
Oh, like a cosmic credit score for the soul.
Yes, exactly. Let's run with that for a second. Think about how a financial credit score works in our daily lives. It's this invisible floating number that just follows you everywhere you go.
Constantly judging you.
Right. It represents your trustworthiness to a bank or a lender. If you miss a payment or if you break trust with that lender, you get a ding on your score. It's a mark on your financial structure.
And if your score drops too low, you're denied entry to the exclusive club. You can't buy the house, you can't get the car loan, your options just shrink.
Exactly. In this text, if you get a ding on your non-material structure, a scar as he calls it, you are denied entry to the Elysium world. But I have to say, the author's specific use of the word scar feels a bit contradictory to me.
Really? How so? What does a scar usually signify to you?
Well, usually scars imply healing. I mean, if you have a physical scar in your arm, it means you survived an injury. The wound closed, the body repaired itself. A scar is often seen as a badge of resilience, a sign that you lived through something difficult.
Yeah, absolutely.
So why is this text treating a scar as a permanent disqualifier? Like, why does a healed wound suddenly ruin an exquisite life?
Well, what's fascinating here is how the text completely redefines our standard understanding of what a scar represents. In our biological reality, as you pointed out, a scar is a triumph of healing.
Right.
But in the metaphysical framework Shifeng is building, a scar is not a sign of healing at all. It is a permanent, visible record of structural deformation.
Oh, so it's less about the healing process and more about the fact that the original shape was lost forever.
Precisely. The author wants you to view breaking trust not just as a social faux pas or, a momentary lapse in judgment or a mistake that you can smooth over with a really good apology.
Which is how we usually handle it.
Right. But they are framing it as a literal collapse of a person's unseen architecture. Imagine your non-material structure, as a pristine, geometrically perfect crystal.
Okay, I'm picturing.
When you break a promise, you aren't just scratching the surface. You are fundamentally fracturing the internal lattice of that crystal. The scar is the evidence that the exquisite geometry is ruined. You are no longer mathematically or structurally capable of fitting into the pristine environment of the Elysium world.
Wow. That makes it sound less like a punishment handed down by an angry deity and more like simple spiritual physics.
That's a great way to put it.
You just no longer fit the keyhole.
That is a highly accurate way to look at it within this framework. The Elysium world requires an unblemished structure, and a broken promise warps that structure permanently.
Okay, so if my soul gets a microscopic scar because I flaked on a commitment, why should I care?
No.
I mean, if it's invisible, does it actually impact my day-to-day life, or is this just about where I go after I die? Because the text doesn't just leave this in the spiritual realm, does it?
No, it doesn't.
It argues that this unseen damage scales up in terrifying ways right here in the physical world.
It does. The text argues that the physical world is deeply sensitive to the integrity of its inhabitants. It draws a historical line, starting from the biblical Old Covenant and New Covenant. The author points out that when the Israelites broke trust, it supposedly led to thousands of years of wandering and hardship.
Right, a massive consequence.
And then it applies that same logic to modern macrostructures. It claims that when a nation breaks trust, it naturally moves toward disorder, poverty, and decline.
And on the micro level, for the individual, it says that breaking trust eventually leads to loneliness, desolation, and destitution. But the text is very careful to note that this happens over time, not immediately.
Yes, the delayed consequence is a crucial element of the philosophy. Because the punishment isn't instantaneous, people often operate under the illusion that they got away with a lie.
They think they gamed the system.
Exactly. But the structural decay is happening invisibly the whole time.
Now, that part I can wrap my head around. A society of liars will become poor and chaotic because no one can reliably do business with each other. But the text goes so much further. It explicitly blames broken trust for modern social conflict, chaos, and here is where it gets really interesting: drastic changes in climate and rising global temperatures.
Yeah, that is certainly the claim that forces you to stop and reread the paragraph.
I read it 3 times. I mean, I have to push back hard on this climate claim. We are talking about a massive leap in logic here.
It's a huge leap.
How does a broken promise in an office in New York theoretically cause a glacier to melt? How does me flaking on a dinner party physically cause the global temperature to rise? What is the actual mechanism the author is claiming here?
To understand the mechanism, we have to look at the author's holistic, highly interconnected worldview. In this philosophy, there is absolutely zero separation between human consciousness, human morality, and the physical environment. None.
Not at all.
Zero. In our standard modern view, we think of the Earth as a rock floating in space, largely indifferent to human behavior, except for our physical emissions like carbon dioxide or methane.
Right, the verifiable science of the greenhouse effect.
But in Xu Feng's framework, the macro environment is treated as a direct physical reflection of the collective microscars of humanity. It is the ultimate metaphysical butterfly effect.
Okay.
The text suggests that human consciousness emits a literal frequency. When you keep your word, that frequency is harmonious. When millions of people break their promises, they're walking around with deformed, chaotic structures emitting discordant frequencies.
So you're saying the Earth is acting as a reactive organism to these frequencies?
Essentially, yes. Imagine 8 billion engines running without oil. The social friction of deception, the chaos of broken contracts, the internal stress of carrying these metaphysical scars. It generates a form of energetic heat.
Oh, wow.
The text is suggesting that the Earth's climate is a mirror reflecting human integrity. Rising global temperatures and erratic weather aren't just caused by fossil fuels. They are the physical translation of a species that has fundamentally broken its covenants. The heat of conflict literally warms the globe.
It is a wild concept. We obviously aren't saying this replaces climate science, but as a mental model, it takes the idea that everything is connected to its absolute most extreme conclusion.
It really does. It forces you to view your personal ethics as an ecological responsibility.
Which means if the consequences of breaking trust are as severe as global warming, societal collapse, and personal spiritual destitution, the rules for keeping trust must be incredibly strict.
Very strict.
But what happens when keeping your word actively harms you? What if the promise was made under false pretenses?
The author does not leave any wiggle room for context or nuance.
None at all. The text embraces extreme absolutism. It explicitly states that it is better to endure economic loss, loss of reputation, or even the loss of physical life than to break trust and leave a scar on the structure of your
This is
life.
a very uncompromising stance.
Extremely. It specifically addresses what we could call the bad actor dilemma. It says, what if you are dealing with deceivers, demons, or great swindlers? What if you realize halfway through an agreement that you have been deceived and you are going to suffer a massive loss?
And the text says, you still cannot break trust.
Right. It says the other party's trustworthiness is their problem. Your promise is yours.
It is a radical severing of reciprocal morality. Usually we think of a contract as a two-way street,
Right.
If one person breaches it, the other is released.
Right. But the text uses this visceral, kind of shocking analogy to explain its stance. It says, quote, vomiting is vomiting.
Yeah.
Whatever caused the vomiting has nothing to do with the fact that vomiting is happening, because vomiting is an objective fact. Similarly, breaking crust is breaking trust, regardless of the reasons behind it.
It's quite the image.
I push back strongly against this analogy, though. In almost all human justice systems, intent and context always matter.
It is a very tough pill to swallow.
Let's apply this to a real-world, modern hypothetical for you listening. Let's say a single mother promises to rent an apartment for a year. 2 months in, she discovers the landlord is highly abusive, maybe even physically dangerous.
Okay.
So she breaks the lease in the middle of the night to protect her kids. Does this text really say she deformed her soul? Does she get a scar because she broke a contract with a bad actor?
Under the strict logic of this text, yes, she does.
That is incredibly harsh.
It is. But this raises an important question about how we define morality versus how this text defines it. You are looking at the single mother's situation through the lens of interpersonal fairness, justice, and self-preservation.
Well, yeah, of course.
But this text divorces morality entirely from interpersonal fairness. It doesn't care about the interaction between two people. It only cares about the internal state of the individual making the promise.
So you're saying it isolates you from the interaction entirely. It's not a two-player game anymore. It's a single-player game.
Exactly. It frames trust as an objective, independent test of your structure. The promise you make is not actually about the demon, the scammer, or the abusive landlord. The promise is a manifestation of your non-material architecture.
Okay, I'm following.
If you break it, even for a completely justifiable, legally sound, sympathetic reason like protecting your family, you are still the one doing the breaking. You are introducing the fracture into your own crystal.
So breaking a promise to a bad actor damages me. It doesn't damage them.
Exactly.
But that creates massive cognitive dissonance. If that is the rule, then the logical conclusion is that a rational person should never promise anyone anything, ever. Does this philosophy just create a society of people terrified to commit?
That is the ultimate tension of the text. It makes the stakes of a promise so high that it demands you are absolutely certain before you give your word.
Because there's no backing out.
None. The text argues that keeping trust and being deceived are two entirely separate matters. The swindler or the bad landlord will face their own tragic end for their deception. Remember, they are breaking their own structure by lying. That is their karmic debt.
Right.
But if you break your word in response to their deception, you have now incurred your own karmic debt. You have allowed their bad behavior to force you into damaging your own structure.
It is like saying just because someone splashes mud on you, it doesn't give you the right to jump into the mud puddle.
Precisely. You must maintain your exquisite nature regardless of the filth around you, which is an incredibly tall order when it involves severe financial ruin or physical danger.
Which really begs the question, why would anyone do this? What is the ultimate payoff for maintaining this unblemished structure against such impossible odds?
Well,
The text talks about the ultimate stakes, but it starts throwing out some heavy jargon. It mentions entry into humanity's civilization 3.0. It also issues a stern warning to a group called the Chanyuan Celestials who are living in the second home. When I read that, it felt like I walked into a movie halfway through. What are we actually talking about here? Who are these people?
yeah, let's do a quick translation of these terms. In Swefing's framework, humanity's civilization 3.0 represents a future, upgraded era of human existence. It's a utopian society characterized by perfect harmony where there is no deception or conflict.
Okay, got it.
And the Chanyuan Celestials refers to a specific community of practitioners who follow this philosophy. They live in what he calls the second home, which is essentially an intentional communal living arrangement striving to model this future utopian society.
Ah, okay. So the author is speaking directly to a dedicated community of followers who are already trying to live out this extreme ethical code.
Yes, and the text warns this specific group that if they break trust and suffering descends upon them, they cannot blame anyone else. They cannot blame the guide, which refers to the spiritual leader of the community.
Right.
They cannot blame gods, Buddhas, celestial beings, or saints. They cannot even blame the primordial Buddha, who the text refers to as the greatest creator. They must bear the punishment entirely themselves.
It is a complete stripping away of the safety net, but I have to admit, it feels incredibly isolating. Let me give you a personal anecdote.
Sure.
A few years ago, I promised a good friend I would attend their big launch event for a new business. The morning of the event, my kid got violently ill. I had to stay home. I broke the promise. Under this framework, I couldn't even pray for forgiveness or ask the greatest creator for a pass because I was taking care of my sick child.
Under this framework, you made a choice. You chose your child's well-being over the structural integrity of your promise. Most of humanity would agree you made the morally correct choice.
I would hope so.
But this text demands radical, terrifying self-responsibility. It removed the comfort of blaming bad luck, bad timing, or even noble competing priorities. You cannot blame the gods. You must bear the consequence of the broken word.
Wow. The text concludes with a metaphor about the garden of the soul, saying that weeds and poisonous plants will leave scars on the structure of life. It says, quote, pollution happens in an instant, but removing pollution requires a long time.
Yeah, that's a powerful line.
When I read that final line about pollution, I thought about spilling red wine on a pristine white carpet. It takes exactly 1 second of clumsiness to drop the glass. But it takes hours of scrubbing, harsh chemicals, and steam cleaning to get it out.
And even then,
Right, sometimes the stain never fully lifts. There's always a faint pink shadow in the fibers.
that is a perfect analogy for what the author is trying to convey. The extreme absolutism isn't there just to be cruel. It is there to ensure that if you do make it to Civilization 3.0 or the Elysium world, you are truly entirely responsible for your own exquisite nature.
You earned it.
Exactly. You didn't get there on a technicality, and you didn't get there because you were excused by a sympathetic judge who understood your kid was sick.
Yeah.
You got there because you held the line when it was hardest.
That is a massive burden to carry. But it certainly clarifies the intensity of the author's vision.
Let's summarize this, because we have covered a massive ideological framework today.
We really have.
We have been unpacking Shuifeng's text, which presents a world where keeping your word is not just good manners, it is a matter of cosmic architecture, climate stability, and spiritual survival.
Absolutely.
It argues that breaking a promise leaves a permanent, disqualifying scar on your non-material structure. It generates metaphysical friction that causes macro-level chaos on Earth, and it cannot be justified under any circumstances, not even if you are swindled by a bad actor or dealing with a personal emergency.
And the overarching theme is that this radical self-responsibility means you, and you alone, bear the consequences of your integrity or the lack thereof.
Even if you listening to this don't believe in the Elysium world or the concept of Civilization 3.0, treating your personal integrity as the literal load-bearing structure of your life is a deeply powerful mental model to carry into your daily interactions.
It really changes your perspective. It fundamentally changes the weight of the phrase, I promise. It forces you to realize the immense power of your commitments.
It definitely does. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, building directly on the text's core premise.
Okay, let's hear it.
The author insists that a broken promise leaves a permanent scar on the structure of your life, and that this scar disqualifies you from an exquisite existence because you are no longer perfect. But if we think about that, what is that scar tissue actually made of?
That's a good question.
Because in biology, scar tissue isn't just a mark of deformation. It is actually denser, stronger, and more resilient than the skin it replaces. It is the biological system's way of ensuring that that specific weak point never breaks again.
Right, it reinforces the break.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if we apply that reality to the non-material structure,
Yeah.
does the arduous, painful process of repairing a broken trust, of paying off that karmic debt and learning from the failure, actually make the full structure stronger?
Oh.
Or is an utterly unblemished, untested structure truly the only path to an exquisite life? Can a soul that has been shattered, tested, and rebuilt ever be considered exquisite, or is perfection only found in what has never, ever been broken?
Wow. Now that is something to think about the next time you find yourself navigating the complicated, muddy waters of trust.
Until next time.